quickly on that, I met Rynn back at a Big Apple Vegetarian, which Gene Thaler founded way back ago, and I was starting a magazine called Satya. And I was looking for people to write for it, and Rynn, I think, was there, but sometime later. And I'm thinking that because Kat Kleiner was the editor of Satya from 2000 to 2007 this year. I remember Rynn came to me, and he would have said something like, I can furnish you with a piece that I am. Make him sound like Prince Charles. He wasn't at all like that. But so is anybody who furnishes me with a piece, why not? Furnish my entire house. So that's what I loved about Rynn. He would never use a simple word when you can just take out from the bowels of the dictionary a particularly weighty word that you could use, like anthropophagy instead of cannibalism, and entrenchment instead of, overeater or something like that. So that's what I loved about Rynn.
Memorial for Rynn Berry. Rynn Berry wrote the book Food for the Gods, Vegetarianism and the World's Religions. Scholar, historian, linguist, writer, runner, researcher, activist, vegan, raw. Rynn Berry wrote the book Hitler, Neither Vegetarian Nor Animal Lover.
I'm going to ask Saurabh Dalal of the International Vegetarian Union to say a few words. There he is over there. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Saurabh Dalal. I'm from Maryland. Like all of you, I also was very shocked and saddened to hear of Rynn's passing. I met Rynn in 1993, the first vegetarian conference. It was actually organized by Freya and her husband Jay, who's also passed away in the year 2000. I think we were destined to meet because Rynn was such a fan of spiritual traditions, and particularly Jainism and Buddhism. And so he was actually giving a talk at this conference in Portland, Oregon. I happened to be in the audience. I think I was probably the only Jain there at the conference at the time. So right at the talk, and then afterwards, we started chatting and talking, and we developed this wonderful friendship, this great exchange of ideas. I've known him for the better part of 2 decades, and I've seen him at many, many events. So whether they were here in this country, whether it was in an event in San Francisco, or he would be coming to DC, we'd invite him to speak. And he always, as you've heard, as you all know, gave such a great talk, and it was well-researched, it was scholarly, and it was always a pleasure to have him, and especially the discussions that happened afterwards. They were always late-night discussions, and he got a chance to meet my parents, and they loved having him there. And of course, the first chapter of his book, Food for the Gods, is about Jainism, and he had recipes that we worked on in our place, and so it was just a great exchange of ideas. So I'm really honored to have known Rynn for all these years. I don't want to keep referring to Rynn in the past tense. He is with us. He will always be with us. I have to keep reminding myself that his spirit is alive, and it's incumbent on all of us to keep it alive. As part of the International Vegetarian Union, we used to put on World Vegetarian Congresses every 2 years. Now we moved them to every year. And so Rynn had traveled extensively. Christina had also been at those, and his talks were always well received because they were about spiritual tradition, they were about ethics, they were about history, and these are passions of mine as well. And so he impacted so many people on an international level. So not only here across vegetarian societies, he was such a generous person. He would give his time freely and generously. He would come to various places. We had the DC Veg Fest. He spoke at our very first DC Veg Fest in 1997. He's given talks in North Carolina, another good friend of his, Dylan Barman, also in San Francisco with Dixie May, and so many other vegetarian groups like in San Antonio that he just loved going to and appreciated. And around the world, I've been fortunate enough to plan my travels with these conferences, and so I recall that one of our first conferences was actually here in North America at the Summerfest. We piggybacked with the Summerfest, and so that was probably one of the first times when I've seen him perform as well. And then in Edinburgh and Dresden, the 100th anniversary of the International Vegetarian Union was in Dresden. It was founded in 1908 in Dresden.
Oh, he did a display.
Yes, and so he did a display. As a matter of fact, he got front page publicity in 2 local papers because of his wonderful booklet, Hitler, Neither Vegetarian Nor Animal Lover. And so I think he was very proud of that, especially fitting being in Germany at the 100th anniversary in 2008. I also had the fortune to be in town when Rynn's body was identified. And I was able to go to the hospital. I just wanted to share my thoughts of what happened because Rynn was such a great believer in Buddhism and Jainism. And so when I'd heard, and I'd been talking to Christina, who was in Brazil at the time, and I talked to Charles, and so I was able to make it to the hospital. And one thing I just recall, and I think Martin, you were there earlier that day too, if I remember right, but I was there that night. And he was there in a very peaceful state, and you've probably seen some of the pictures of him at the time. And what I was hoping to do was, because the Jain tradition believes that the soul exists as long as the breath exists. So no matter what the mental state may be, the soul is there as long as the breath is there. And so what I hoped to do when I was there was to connect with his life force and just hold his hand and his feet. And then I remembered a few Jain prayers that I was able to say while he was there. And I have no doubt that his soul was hovering with his body, and it was ready for its journey. And this one mantra that I recall, I'd like to repeat it here for all of you. It's called the Mokar Mantra. Please excuse me for a second. It was a beautiful experience to be there with Rynn and to tell him how much he was loved and how much he was needed if there was some way for him to be able to reconnect with his body. And so this was one way to at least encourage the Atma, his soul, to do whatever it needed to in its karmic state on its journey. And so it's called the Mokar Mantra. So it's Om Namo Arihantanam, Om Namo Siddhanam, Om Namo Ayariyanam, Om Namo Uvajayanam, Om Namo Loye Savasavanam. The first 5 lines are basically showing respect for the spiritual leaders who have attained or well on their path towards purification. Then it goes, Eso Pancho Namukaro, Sava Bhava Parasano, Mangalanam Cha Sovesim, Paramam Hoy Mangalam. And those last 4 lines talk about how we bow down to these great souls and we try and realize their qualities within ourselves in order to help us purify ourselves. And of all of the great things there are, the most auspicious, the most important is for us to diminish our sins and to achieve the state of purification. So that was the mantra that I was able to do with Rynn. Western science, there's a lot that we don't understand, and especially when it comes to things like the nature of the soul. And as a physicist, we try and understand, at every level, but we just don't have any insight at all. And I'd like to believe that, that consciousness and the Atma persists, and his Atma is where it's supposed to be, and it's for all of us to keep it alive.
So we have about 10 minutes if people want to share a story or a thought. Yes, Laurie.
Hello, everybody. We're all here to honor and celebrate the life of this wonderful man. And I don't want to be redundant because just about everything I wanted to say, Robbie, you covered, and Pam, you covered, so there's really nothing left for me to say, so I'm just going to share a couple of thoughts. I met Rynn on a bus trip to Farm Sanctuary. And like others have said, it seems like I knew him before. Like he's always been in my life, and I've been a vegetarian now for 25 years and vegan for 18. And he's been such an integral part of the reason why I'm vegetarian. And the one thing I noticed about Rynn is that he always had that special quality of really listening and responding to people and to questions from the audience. Although he was extremely intelligent and very introspective, he was never elitist or arrogant or condescending. And he really gave a great deal of thought to questions raised by people that were not aware of the issues, and I always really respected that. He was very soft-spoken, was a wonderful advocate for the animals, as well as a great role model for all of us in the vegetarian community. He will be sorely missed. I'll really miss seeing him around New York City. I used to run into him all the time in Integral Yoga or in Union Square, where he could be seen selling or even just giving out his latest edition of the Vegan Guide to New York City. And he was always more than willing to talk to anybody who didn't know and wanted to learn more. He was just a wonderful educator, very down to earth, and he took complicated subjects and made them seem accessible to anybody who was willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to grow. So I just want to say, here is one of his copies, the New York City Guide, one of his latest editions. I just want to say Here's to you, Rynn. He's surely in heaven, probably distributing this amongst the angels. May you rest in peace, and rest assured that your spirit is still alive with us, and that your inspiring, important words and works will never be forgotten. Thank you.
So I'm going to ask Christina to come up to say a few words, and then we have about 15 minutes for people, if they want to add their thoughts and reflections. Call it a day. So, Christina.
First, I'd like to thank Pamela and Victoria and Roberta for organizing this celebration of Rynn's life.
And I also like to thank Charles and his family for all the support, and Martin, and if I forget, and Tom, and if I forget anybody, please forgive me. I met Rynn in '94 at a farm sanctuary at Watkins Glen, and since then we became good friends, close friends.
I met his siblings in Florida, Ghislaine and Sigurd, and we would go every summer, we go and visit them. His mother was alive, unfortunately she passed away in '91, but then we kept visiting them.
And then Ghislaine, she mentioned the tale of the Durian, so I'm going to tell you the story. Rynn became more interested in raw foods and fruits in '95. And then I followed him 1 year later, in '96, and he loved durian. And they sell in Chinatown, and it's frozen.
I believe he had in Canada fresh durian. So we went to visit his siblings in Florida, and we found durian. That was in 2003, I believe, or 2004. And then we brought durian to the house. I don't know how many of you had durian. It has a strong smell.
Yeah, oh boy.
So his sister, she told us that the scent was in her house for days. And she hated it, and she didn't even want to try it. But we devoured, and none of his family members or friends, Sigurd and Guy, they wanted to try it. So Rynn was also very active, and he was very strong. He did gymnastics in high school, I believe in college too.
So I used to be a semi-professional long-distance runner. I was telling Charles, Charles used to run too, and Peter would run, and Rynn was in the family. In the 1980s, I used to cover 2 miles in 9 minutes, and that was very good. Around 96, 7, I started running with Rynn in Prospect Park. And then
Rynn would pass by me. not very far, but he'll keep passing by me, and he would look at me and say, "Eat my sand now, ha ha ha." And I hated that. And then Rynn, when we visited Guy and Sigurd in Florida, she has a swimming pool, and we compete every time, all 4 styles. And Rynn always beat me. And he called my butterfly style drowning moth. Then he beat me ping pong, snooker, chess, tic-tac-toe, everything, thumb wrestling. But I got my revenge. I was telling Charles that story. I didn't tell him the end.
I got my revenge when we went to a conference, I believe it was in Washington. Then there was the gym in the hotel, and then I was showing Rynn how to use the universal weightlifting machine. I put some weight there, then I tried 250 pounds on a leg press, and Rynn did it. I said, I have to put more weight. So I put 300, and he couldn't do it, and then I did it. And then from that day on, Rynn started calling me Little Super Ant.
I just wanted to share with you, there was a nice, Rynn was supposed to go to Brazil. There were some informal talks that he was going to give there in São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro with small groups. On January 11th, he was scheduled to speak in a very good restaurant, vegan restaurant, one of the few in São Paulo that he loved. The organizer, his name is Leon, and his wife, they're announcing that they're going to move, and they're vegan athletes. They won the Brazilian title for Jiu-Jitsu, the state, São Paulo state title, and they competed in Los Angeles last year. They got 2nd place, and they're coming back, and they want to win 1st place.
They invited Rynn to give a talk to a small gathering there. And then unfortunately Rynn didn't make it, but I went there and they reminded everyone of Rynn, and there are many people there were about 35 people there. They're reminiscing on Rynn, and 3 times, as I remember, Leon is a philosophy high school teacher. He tried to introduce animal rights and veganism into the curriculum of high schools, but he had a hard time. He was fired many times for trying, and then finally he got a tenure job, and they couldn't fire him, but they wouldn't let him invite speakers. But then he was telling Rynn and I that he would like Rynn to donate some books for the school library, which Rynn did. I proposed, why don't Rynn come and give a talk? And because he's an international person, he's not Brazilian, so this school they're gonna love, they're gonna call the media because there's a professor here from the United States. So that happens, and then they let Rynn speak there. So there were 70 high school students from different classes, from different years. And they're very interested. Some speak a little broken English, and they're asking him questions in English. They're taking pictures. They're videotaping Rynn. They're going to show to their families. And then Rynn was writing on the board the names and the dates, and I was translating to the students. And the students, they approached Rynn at the end. They said they want to study history, and they want to follow his path, and telling him about their experience becoming vegan and influencing their families and family members, health improved. And then in the end, the director of the school, he brought a little certificate to Rynn, thanking for his first time in the school. All 70 students signed on the back. And Rynn said that was the most important award that I got in my whole life. Better than a Nobel Prize, better than anything, because it had those students' names on the back. That was Professor Leon. He mentioned that in that January 11th, that Rynn went 2 more times to the school, and thanks to Rynn, then he was able to invite more speakers to come, and he was able to publish 2 books on introducing animal rights and veganism to the curriculum of public high schools all over Brazil. Rynn was born in Hawaii, and he left to live in Florida. And then the first time that he went back there to give a talk at the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, he knew before Dr. Bill Harris, who wrote the scientific basis for vegetarianism, and he's a retired doctor, and he's a pilot, and he jumps parachutes. And he invited Rynn and I to go on a glider. And I'm afraid of heights, and Rynn too. But we went separately because it only fits 2 people. Dr. Harris, he took Rynn first because Rynn is over 100 pounds, so he could stay in the front, and that's the worst place for somebody who's afraid of heights to be. Dr. Harris, he did on purpose. He made the plane tilt upwards, and when that happens, it would just fall, free fall, and Rynn had to correct it. And he told Rynn, now you correct, and Rynn did. I saw the what Rynn did, and it was fine. Then it was my turn. Then because I'm 110 pounds, I can't go on front. So then I have to be in the back, and then I didn't feel I wasn't afraid, so I was able to, he did the same thing to me, and it was scary going down, free fall, but I was able to correct it. And Dr. Harris invited us to jump a parachute, and we declined. That was a very good experience that he had in Hawaii, but he didn't want to live there. He wanted to live in New York, in Brooklyn. That's his favorite neighborhood. Like Professor Reagan said, that he lived there too, and so he knows what Rynn was talking about. That's what I wanted to say.
Anybody else want to share? Yes, Nancy.
I met Rynn. I had a friend, Michael Berensweig, who had read Food for the Gods, Vegetarianism and the World's Religions, and he kept saying, Nancy, you have to read this book. My name is Nancy Kogel. You have to read this book. It's great. And I finally, not being a big reader, I finally spent months reading it and was very impressed with it. We got a radio show on WBAI about speciesism and animal rights. And we decided to have Rynn on to interview him. And of course, we interviewed him. It took hours and hours because there was so much information that he had about that book specifically, but many other topics. And my friend Michael was like, oh, you know, I've called up Rynn and I've spoken to him. He said, sure. And I was like, for me, Rynn was kind of like this unapproachable person because he wrote this amazing book and I felt very like in awe. But meeting him, and he was so cordial and so easy to work with, and he was, yeah, sure, interview, yeah, and when, you know, it's very, yeah, as just friends, somebody you want to just talk to. Of course, we edited that 2 or 3 hour interview down to 2 hours, and his main thing, his main thesis was that Jesus, that I remember like being really focusing on, was that Jesus was an animal liberationist, that he had come to planet Earth to liberate animals. And it was so like, kind of like, whoa, out there, that I was wondering how the radio audience really liked it, is what I heard. I'm making a film and I was really looking forward to interviewing him for the film. Rynn! You left too soon! Specifically about a book that's Caesar's Messiah, the Roman conspiracy to invent Jesus, that says that there was no Jesus or Jesus was Lazarus. And I wanted to have a nice tete-a-tete with Rynn and kind of like a devil's advocate kind of thing. But he left too soon. And I would bump into him in the streets of the East Village all the time, and always surprised that he would deign to stop and talk to me. And he was always just so friendly and gave me his guidebook. Thank you for being you, Rynn. Thank you.
Couple more.
I know we don't have time, so I'll make it quick, but Lynn Kimber, president of the Boston Vegetarian Society since very gods. I guess I'm the representative. And all I want to say is that when Rynn did come to visit me, he came to visit my kayaks. I'm right at the Cape Cod Canal, so the whole time there, in fact, he was supposed to leave at a certain time on a Monday morning, and I had plans for the afternoon. But he's out in the kayak, and I couldn't get him back. The train had already left, so I knew he was going to stay later. But he really loved that, and he did speak of the Boston Vegetarian Society several times. And he was a dear friend, and he certainly will be missed. And that's it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you again, the family, for coming as well. And thank you for sharing stories about Peter. In true classic vegetarian fashion, now let's get to the most important thing, which is the food at the back. So there's still food to go. We have a few more minutes to mingle.
I'll just say, please take food. Please take your dinner home with you. Lots of desserts over here just behind Mark. And if anybody feels like this is ending too quickly and you just want to stay and talk, go to my apartment in this building. The dog is friendly. Sit and wait, and others may join.
And I always looked forward to seeing Rynn Berry at the Vegetarian Summerfest every year, and he's really going to be missed. He was such an important part of our community, you know, being our historian, our documentarian, and I really enjoyed his sessions at the Vegetarian Summerfest, and I'm so sad that I won't be seeing him there again. And I'm the guide to animal rights for About.com.
I first met Rynn Berry at the Veggie Fest in Pennsylvania, and the thing that I always loved about Rynn was his remarkable intellect. He was so bright and so he was able to see situations from just such a fresh perspective. He's the first person I ever heard use the word Donnybrook spoken. He was funny, and he seemed to me like a gentleman from another age, and I really appreciate his wisdom and his writing. I particularly love his book, Hitler, Neither Vegetarian Nor Animal Lover, my favorite. And he's just a wonderful guy, and he will be missed.
Vegetarian Fest. I was probably 15 years ago, and I went for years. I brought my ex-husband, I brought my mom, and I still went by myself. But my mother loved him. She would go to his lectures because they were a little more academic, and she liked that about him. Like I'd be there not always understanding what he was talking about. It was higher level than the other things, but it was a lot about history and things like that. My mom loved it. So she knows him. She's 85 years old. So she said, "Oh, I remember." And we also, of course, have all the veggie books that he used to publish. They put together. So.
Just P.S. He showed up at all events. He was supportive of what everybody was doing. I mean, wherever anyone showed up, he happened to be there, which means that he was at everything. For him to be at every single thing I was ever at meant that he was at those things and 2 or 3 times more things. He somehow showed up at everything. God bless him.
And he was a speaker at Big Apple Vegetarian several times.
I love the fact that he was the historian of all things vegetarian. And we don't actually have anyone to step into his shoes, his vegan shoes. Thank you.
To be here, it's beautiful. What a wonderful venue. And Robbie did so much work as usual with her cooking. And I made my very first raw cheese. And I think Rynn would really, really love what we're doing. And he's visited me a few times, but I think he really came for my kayaks and not for me, because he loved kayaking. But I just remember the day when he insisted on going kayaking and it was so windy, and I finally just gave up and said, "Rynn, you're on your own, because I can't do this anymore." Evelyn Kimber sends her regards from the Boston Vegetarian Society, and Rynn spoke there several times, so that's it, I think. Is that okay?